to That Good Fight, the Reformation for Gentlemen. My name is Aaron Edwards, and I am joined, as ever, by the great Nathan Paler.
Hi.
And the great Tom Chaldecott, albeit not in the same room.
Hello.
Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
Oh, well, yeah, we're sat here in my house, and we've got a dog in between us, Aaron.
We have. I hadn't even registered. Literally, this is the first time they just said that there is a dog just sleeping against...
Yeah, my golden retriever has made another appearance, though not on video, but has decided the best place to sleep is sat between Aaron and I.
Yeah, and right with all the wires of the roadcaster.
Yeah, it's a brilliant position she's chosen. I'm sure it will cause no problems within the next hour.
Tom, who owns the roadcaster, is probably going to be slightly nervous, but he can't get to us because he's somewhere else. So
all I can say, she's
glad that I can't quite see the setup.
Yeah. It's not like it is when you're here, Tom. Just put it that way.
Just look at the Tudor beams that he's got. Look, just admire the grandfather clock in the background. That's just what you need to focus your mind on, and not the dog that could wake up and decide to jump all over the recording equipment. Anyway, but no, really good to see you all, and good for us to get another episode in without the usual 10-week break that we've been accustomed to over
very consistent podcast.
The leisurely 10 weeks that we had in between, or whatever it was, maybe 8 weeks. But we are hoping to get into a more regular rhythm. And we wanted to, especially in this episode, follow up some of what we were getting at in the last portion of our previous episode, which was relating to these issues, the growing issues on the right, the socio-political right and the theological right as part of that. And those have just exacerbated. Those issues have been monumentally significant, it would seem, in the last 3 months in particular. Some people listening to this will go, what is this about? I don't even understand. And so we'll kind of recap again, but you could listen to our last episode, which was about Trump's victory in the aftermath of that, and Nazis and men on the right is kind of where we're at. So if anyone wants to jump in as to where we're up to, or would you like me to kind of give you a little summary myself?
Yeah, give a summary.
I'll give you some. I didn't want to talk too much in the intro, but
that's fine. I'm confident.
Saying give a summary gives me legitimacy to keep talking.
You have permission.
There we are. Thank you. Yeah. So basically, we were getting at these issues of saying how today are we reaching these red-pilled men, and by red pill we mean that notion of the Matrix. If you've not seen the film The Matrix, you won't understand that terminology at all, but it's become completely normal to use that language, and we kind of forget that some people don't understand what it means.
Well, I must say, I'm more familiar with it from about 10 years ago of internet discourse.
Yeah.
So this is something that started, I'm really sorry, guys, but it did, in something called Gamergate in 2014.
Yes.
Now, of course, nowadays, the leftist rags will talk about Gamergate as the precursor to Trump and other things. So I think...
I'm going to be honest, I don't know immediately what Gamergate is.
Okay, so let me give you a bit of an explanation, because there was an interesting meme that went round a few weeks, about just after Trump got elected, saying, and there's this game journalist, guys, you don't need to worry about it, but Zoe Quinn slept with someone who's not a boyfriend, and Trump got elected. And it was like this inside joke, because what happened is, in 2014, there was this minor, in-house, slightly cringy disagreement in the video game journalism area, because it turned out that various video game journalists had conspired together to write a piece called Gamers Are Dead, and it was leftist journalists writing against what is normally more of a conservative, male-centered video. Now, we can have our opinion.
Gamers are more right-wing, usually.
Well, historically, think about the kind of games that would have been released in the 2000s. You'd usually have a male protagonist. It would usually be, guns and glory and guts and all that sort of stuff. Now, we can disagree about video games or think they're bad, but my point is that was the culture. And so all of a sudden, it turns out that these video game leftist journalists conspire together. And there's actually behind the scenes, there is literally a forum that they all participate on and conspire together to create this. Well, this caused a massive stink when it came out, and loads of gamers then were like, we don't want leftist politics in our games.
Right. And
Gamergate is what that is named after. It was this big disagreement online from more conservatively leaning individuals concerning video games, and it then spiraled into something way beyond video games, because it became about culture. It became about preserving culture against a progressive influence. So when loads of the journalist class, as was then discovered, this was during the days of Obama, so this was way before Trump. a good couple of years before Trump. And suddenly there was a greater awareness of, there's a journalist class that hates us and is incredibly progressive and is trying to push a certain political agenda on a hobby that shouldn't have anything to do with politics.
So it's the wokeification of their culture, really.
Exactly. Now, this is where a lot of that language comes from. Red-pilled, because what it cultivated was a bunch of YouTube channels and other things that were explicitly anti-woke, anti-games journalists. And a lot of the modern political voices came from that time period. You know, Sargon of Akkad, Carl Benjamin, Lotus Eaters, he made his name during Gamergate.
Right.
So a lot of the red-pilled language comes from that time period, based one of the early people to speak out in favour of the gamers in that whole dispute. I can't remember her name now, but she was working for like a more conservative, as it were, feminist second wave feminist organisation, speaking against this third wave feminism in the journalism, and they called her Based Mom. That's what they called it.
Is that where the term
That's where it comes? Well,
that's bona fide. That is 100% where
I'm telling you, and maybe it had its, as with all these things, as with any meme, maybe it had its early days in a Reddit thread on completely different context. But when based became a thing was during Gamergate.
That's interesting. That's a helpful little historical tour of that, because there's of course, that won't be the first time people will have responded to, disenfranchised men. Definitely predated 2014,
well,
didn't
of
they?
course.
But you're right that it brings it up into
what it created was an online culture that was now being seen as a particular culture against a journalistic class, against a political class that was exactly. And this is why there's a connection that many of them made between Gamergate and Trump, because lots of the voices during Gamergate then became conservative voices during Trump. But also because, again, there was a greater awareness of a journalistic class against the masses. So this is where a lot of it came. Milo Yiannopoulos. He came from Gamergate.
Ben Shapiro comes out of
Ben
that.
Shapiro came out in favour of Gamergate. There's so much here, as with all. Little storms in teacups, internet things. But it did have a genuinely big cultural effect. This strange, stupid thing about video games.
And I guess some might be listening to this going, why should I? I mean, Tom is probably listening to this going, why should I care about this? It's the kind of thing Tom might say. Would Tom say that?
Well, I think the thing that I would say in there is, Ben Shapiro has been mentioned. A Brit has been mentioned, which is good going for us.
Yeah,
Milo.
Where. How does this affect us, and kind of what's the piece for today? Because we are, we're talking about Trump instantly. We're talking about Gamergate, which I guess is kind of mostly based in the US. And there's a few things that we kind of want to get onto. But how do we think about our context here? How do we think about the people on the right? Like, one of the kind of final pieces that we were chatting about in the last episode was, who are those people on the right? How do we identify them? What are their characteristics, etc. And I was kind of thinking a bit more about that as well, and kind of, how do we identify them? So I suppose I want to drag you.
It's a good question. Can I just chip in?
Sure.
Because I actually think it is connected. Because so how did because I was much more socially liberal in 2013 than I am now. If you'd asked 2013 Nathan, do you sympathise with feminism? I'd probably go, yeah. Because I see that there are XYZ issues. It was Gamergate and listening to all this stuff that has caused not only me, but so many others to actually go, there are these other cultural, political issues. And it's part of a big... It was the thing that woke a lot of people up. Now, here's the other connection in response to Tom, which is a good point, Tom. I think... eventually it creates a sort of culture of conservatism that isn't explicitly Christian. So it creates
Christless conservatism.
Exactly. So like Carl Benjamin is a great example. He has moved away from classical liberalism in recent years to being an out and out conservative. But he is a man who is an atheist who, if you ask Calvin Robertson, he's interviewed him on this exact issue, who would want to be a Christian but isn't. And there are lots of people now who made their name in those early days, perhaps now have come to maturity in the last few years, perhaps. But either way, are in this sphere of general cultural conservatism, which, as we're saying, has roots much further back, but isn't necessarily Christian. How do we reach that sort of person?
Yeah, absolutely. And it did not exist previously as well. This is a right wing, as it were, a wing of the right wing, maybe, that didn't exist. And it was young, alt-right. It was people who were challenging that that consensus. It was challenging the elites. Of course, yes, left and right have always argued in the modern political discourse. That's been completely normal, but it does affect us in the UK. So that's why I think, like to Tom's point, we can't pretend that we are separate from it. Even if someone's listening to this going, I just don't care about all that internet crazy world. There is an extent to be fair. People do need to get on with their lives and build things and do things and plant churches and help churches grow, etc. So many Christians will be looking, well, all of that kind of craziness doesn't matter, but it's a bit like the naivety of going, I don't really care what they do in the academy. It doesn't really affect me because they just talk in this like esoteric language that doesn't matter. It's like, yeah, okay. There's the old Devil Wears Prada thing that James K. Smith, who I don't like anymore really, but he was a cultural critic who referenced the film The Devil Wears Prada, a chick flick, and as to speak about the way that ideas filter their way down. So that it starts off, but I think there's some scene in that movie which was like someone going, I don't care about all this high-end fashion that happens in Paris and Milan. It just like, it's just another world. I just want to go and buy a jumper. So, okay, what jumper do you want to buy? It's like, I want to buy this cobalt blue jumper. Oh, did you realise that 18 months ago, cobalt blue was on the catwalk in Milan or something? And then you don't even know why, but it comes all the way down to the bargain stores are affected by all that stuff. The academy is the same. Woke CRT, I can speak from direct experience of seeing that as in the academy and thinking, this is just absolutely ridiculous bonkers. And I'm so glad that most people don't read academic journal articles because they can't understand them and they leave it to the academics. And there's a barrier between the world that we live in and most churches to the world of academia. There's a huge barrier. And you and I, Nathan, have been saying for years, how do we get the academy and the church to speak to one another more? And I was going, I'm so glad the academy and the church don't speak to one another. But then COVID happens and the CRT, I mean, it was before this COVID anyway, but that kind of exacerbated it, the contradictions in it. It came into the church in a really, really significant way. And it was exactly the same stuff I saw in those esoteric journal articles was being spoken out in everyday language by preachers in evangelical pulpits. So this stuff absolutely comes and hits. And even the weird alt-right, stupid sounding little fisticuffs that happen online, they actually do come down to land and they come to earth in real things. So they're affecting all of us. The way I would link it, especially to Britain, is that we don't have a strong, robust socio-political right. It's always fragmented. It's always been held at arm's length. There's always the safe middle. So there are obviously right-leaning political parties and people, and it seems like it's harder to push further right without apparently being called a racist or a bigot in some way, because you do have obviously a history of racism in the UK, and you do have far-right people who are genuinely so annoyed at immigrants that they have come to, embrace kind of I don't even know if they would put it as white supremacy, but it would be something that would clearly border on racism, and we wouldn't want to.
I read
support.
The other day. I had a curiosity moment, and I thought to myself, I remember Nick Griffin from the BNP, and I thought to myself, I wonder if this is one of those things. So I just want to be absolutely perfectly transparent and look at the manifesto for the BNP from 2010. And I'm thinking to myself, were they as bad as you think they are? and then I start looking into it and I start reading about like mandatory repatriation. So they'll grab people and forcibly take them out. And you'll hear his comments on like
even legal migrants as well. You're not talking about illegal,
but also about encouraging repatriation of legal as well. But more specifically, more horrendously, like how he talked about Holocaust denial and stuff like that. And you're thinking, yeah, you were pretty bad, weren't you?
And also, it's pretty bad. It's also like whenever you get into the these people, you can always see a really weird checkered past where they've almost always, like literally, I don't know, Nick Griffin's the same as others. You look at their past. Oh yeah, there was this time when he said all this stuff, and it's like completely abject racism. But he's moved on from that now, and so the fear people have in Britain is that they're being duped by anyone who's hijacking certain ideas and going.
Well, that's exactly why I looked it up. Because I was thinking to myself, can I trust what I've been told about Nick Griffin? And then I was like, no. There is such a thing as. Say it again, sorry, Tom.
Paul Golding now. What is the difference between kind of what you're describing there and even that just general, and I don't know if this is kind of tied immediately to conservatism, is that just the piggybacking off the kind of I'm a Christian piece. We heard that from Farage, I don't know how many months ago. and they. Yeah, there is that piggybacking.
So go on, Nathan. Go.
Just the Paul Golding thing. Britain first, yeah? Is that what we're talking about? Just checking. I remember back in the day when they were active filming themselves storming into mosques and putting and
crosses and stuff.
And putting like bacon and things. No, they're not the ones who put bacon on the handles of mosques, are they? They're not the ones who did that.
Know.
But no, they certainly did make a show of going into mosques, and they were carrying crosses around near mosques. And I did remember thinking at the time, this doesn't smell right. There is a show, there is a theatre to their Christianity that isn't that look, I'm willing to be proved wrong, but everything I have seen suggests that sort of, as you say, Tom, that sort of Farage, I am a Christian thing, it is a show of national allegiance rather than a declaration of personal faith.
Yeah, it's funny how related that is. I actually got a message from Paul Golding last year, which I haven't responded to. Kind of like, oh, can you come on my podcast, etc. Big fan. I was like, And now that's the kind of thing that liberals would go, oh, look, how terrible the stuff that you're saying about combative Christianity, militant Christianity, whatever we want to use. If it's like getting people like him to go, oh, look, I'm a big fan of your brand of Christianity. And I say, like, the stuff that I would say online is pretty tame, I would say, relative to any of the guys that we would connect with in the US who are pushing these things, but maybe relative to the absolutely abject cowardice and milk toast Christianity we have here, maybe it looks slightly more combative. But it's for me that I'm really, really disdainful of the kind of guilt by association people have with someone on the right. So actually, like the only reason I would not necessarily want to be like associating necessarily with Golding is I don't quite know yet. I don't really know if I can trust. It's the same stuff. You don't quite know if you can trust whether this is a kind of political I think play being done. But you do want to say, well, what's wrong with actually trying to reach people with the gospel? So if you think they're not actually Christian, if you think they're using Christianity falsely to get some kind of Christian vote and tying it with British identity without really understanding faith in Christ and living it, because of course he does say all sorts of stuff publicly, which is like, you're just swearing about, this or that, immigrants and stuff like that. So but how could you build a bridge and go, how do we reach you where we don't like immigration the way it's, we don't like what it's doing to our nation. We don't like the desecration of British identity.
And we would be for forced repatriation of illegal immigrants.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's the other stuff.
it's all that other stuff, yeah. And they would obviously say, oh, we're not racist. But so the hard thing is we have this cynicism ingrained, and we need to be really wise, prayerful about thinking, how do you separate the bad actors from the good faith people who are just patriotic? I'm not on Paul Golding. I'm not sold on going, oh, what a horrible, evil man. I'm literally just going, I don't think I know enough about what you're doing and saying publicly. And it does take some discernment.
I don't think we should be. It goes back to what we were talking about last time, and Tom, do chip in a second. But it goes back to what we were saying last time. How do we reach these guys? We can't do that if we come immediately with moral judgment. We're better than you. We're too big for you. We're too Christian for you. We can't talk to you. I want to be able to talk to them, even if I disagree with them strongly, even if I suspect that Christianity is a kind of theatrical display of national allegiance. Well, I still want to talk to them.
Yeah.
I still want to talk to them. I still want to love my neighbour and talk to them regardless of their opinion.
Yeah.
I think it connects, doesn't it, to a wider point, and we touched on this a little bit last time, but we can't be so based that our brains fall out.
Yeah.
We have to have some sort of degree of discernment. And there is a culture online. It goes back to what you were saying. We should be aware of what's being said. If you want to understand cultural currents, you do, unfortunately, have to be at least a little bit aware of what is happening online. I wish that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
I genuinely wish that wasn't true. I think it's a net negative for the world, the whole online culture as it's now become.
But you're in the river. The currents are happening, so you're being swayed by them some way.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to. Does that mean you have to spend all your time on it? No. Does it mean you would be much happier if you went into the woods and chop wood with your kids? Yeah, it probably would be. But if you want to understand culture, sorry, this is the game you've got to play.
Yeah.
But in that game you play, again, you can't be so based. Your brains fall out. Based, to use other B's, it's like a race to the bottom, or it can become like a race to the bottom. How conservative can I sound?
Yeah. Nietzschean nihilism is basically the basis
it's
of
like, you think repatriation for illegal immigrants, and yeah, I do, because I've got a whole I've got a system of thought in my head about what that means, and because it's a violation of borders, and it's about a safety thing, it's about protecting the integrity of the nation. Well, therefore, you must, I think that you should repatriate people who are black and brown, and I want to send them all home to Africa.
yeah.
It's like, no, I'm not going to go with you on that. That's bonkers.
Yeah.
I'm not going to race you to the bottom just to look more conservative. You have that award, fine. You have the little award of most based person, fine. I want to be Christian.
Yeah.
That's what I want to be.
Absolutely. And that's where... Sorry, Tommy, you jump in, please. Sorry.
I think that is a really important conversation, because I wonder if that is one of the dangers that we're kind of seeing. How much are we seeing that around us, and how are some of those things being picked up that we're actually not recognizing they're actually not Christian. They are run, how conservative can I look? But I wonder, on coming back a little bit in the conversation, if we're kind of overthinking our engagement with the right. So there are some people that you might not want to associate with, but like if they existed and you can't kind of stamp a metric on them or a value or a quantity, they existed on the left, would you go and talk to them? Well, you probably would. You probably welcome them into your house. You regularly see debates over. I was talking with someone a little while back. He works for a company, and they were thinking about taking on a new premises, and the people upstairs were just like an LGBTQW advocacy. Okay, this guy was a Christian, and he's like, what do we do about it? How do we navigate it? What do we do with the application form? If that was someone on the right, you'd immediately just be like, well, we're not having anything to do with it.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Instantly. So it's that inconsistency. And I wonder how much, I think we are overthinking, but at the same time, I'm not sure if we are, and there's a balance there. But the areas that I think we're just not being consistent with the right or the left.
Yeah.
And I think
and a lot of it comes from fear as well. So in that instance, if I've understood what you've said, correct me if I'm misunderstanding you, but a lot of it comes from fear. You know that if you stand against an application for an LGBTQ office, you're going to face considerable pushback. If you tell a right-wing organisation you're not having it, you get nothing.
Well, no, you get a badge of honour.
You get a badge of honour. Yeah, you get a badge of honour. Yeah, quite right. So a lot of it, you are dealing with something very human, which is the flesh and the fears of the flesh. But yeah, you're right. There is a partiality here, and you're right, Tom, to point it out.
And this is the irony, by the way, of the whole. It's easy for Christians to come and go, we're not going to associate with these horrible racist, or maybe like not anti-racist enough, which I think is probably what it actually boils down to. I don't think I've seen actual racism in any significant form in this country by those people on the right, and I include Tommy Robinson. It certainly isn't racist at all. I don't think, from the things I've seen from him and heard from him. Maybe someone could come and go, oh, you don't know, he said this thing here and here, but he regularly talks about how half his friends are non-white. He grew up in Luton, did he? And he's the kind of evil, he's the Voldemort at the moment, which I think is amazing, because there's people way further to his right, which there are people who are more of a problem, but they're so insignificant in enclaves. They're not on the verge of getting any kind of power. It's like they're worried about Tommy Robinson. And as he says himself, they're going to make him a martyr. And the issue with the guilt by association thing is, I was chatting, funnily enough, to someone in the legal world who is a Christian and has the potential of representing Tommy Robinson in court, and is weighing it up, the reputational risks. He has to talk about it with his wife, because she's worried, will our home be firebombed? And I said, and he was of the same in mind. He said, don't think that's likely to happen.
But
I don't think...
You will get the attention of hope, not hate.
Yeah.
They have a thing against Tommy Robinson.
Yeah, and it's like, if you're defending him, you're defending, therefore, someone who's terrible. And you think, well, the kind of things he's exposing, they're not... Like, shouldn't we want to expose these things? This is where the conversation in Britain is very different, in that we're focused on Islam to a greater degree, because we are. America is not being. I mean, maybe America can say they're being overrun by immigrants in different ways, sure, but from the southern border especially, they don't have the same issue of Islam taking hold. We have it to such a great degree here, partly because of our history, our imperial history affects some of that, our links and our proximity to those nations through Europe, obviously coming through continental Europe. America doesn't have that. Yes, they could talk about Islam, but they haven't got the issue we have of mosques coming up, of Muslims getting into positions of power, into loads of local councils, and Mayor of London currently is a Muslim. So those are live, real issues. So us standing against it, and Tommy Robinson pointing out the contradictory nature of how we treat Muslims when they get in trouble differently, and there's a fear of that. So that fear that Tom rightly references that Christians may have over left and right, it's the same. For us, it's especially with relating to Islam. And that's like weirdly a leftist issue, because the left want to support Islam. And we regularly say, we said this in our multiculturalism episode, I think, how mad that is, because you just read the Quran, that they're on the right, technically, on the way they see society and people and women and things like this. This isn't something that you should be aligning yourself with and defending. Yeah, this is the cacophony, I think, of what I'd probably call a demonic conspiracy. I'm not saying there's a cabal of people trying to destroy us around a board table somewhere. I think there are demons working in league, and none of this stuff like the woke alliance with Islam doesn't make any sense at all. We've said it's so stupid, it's unbelievable. LGBT does not go with Islam, and yet we kind of happily allow this kind of strange marriage. But in relation to the reputational thing, this is what, so this lawyer's having to weigh up. Is it worth me doing this? Christians will have a go at me and they'll say, oh, you support this horrible person, Tommy Robinson, who isn't a Christian. But I was like, well, he isn't a Christian, but he's certainly closer to becoming a Christian than he was previously. I mean, he said publicly that he prayed for the first time. He's been hanging out with Calvin Robinson a little bit. And, there's people on the right who see these issues. Russell Brand would be another one who's, I think, properly become a Christian. He may run into trouble. He may have all sorts of issues because he's already got a public platform and he's saying a lot of stuff whilst being a baby Christian, but it's a tricky for him. I'm glad he's doing it. He's probably going to have people become Christians because of his influence, 12 million followers, whatever. But then you've got others like that who are in that slipstream. And so we should be celebrating that and trying to reach these people. And we're just doing, ironically enough, what the left-leaning evangelicals like Tim Keller told us to do, which is to build bridges and contextualize the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9. The problem is we've been doing that only to the left. So to Tom's point, we want to go and reach the LGBT. Or you said the same thing, Nathan. Go and reach the LGBT person, but we're not going to go and talk to a Paul Golding. We're not going to go on his podcast and talk with him. So I say that even of myself, I wrestle with that because I say as an evangelical still, we do want to preach the gospel. And if we're going to make bridges and say, right, so this is the Chris Watkin thing that the left, the Big Eva loves, diagonalization. I think we mentioned this in the last episode. So Chris Watkin writes this book that Tim Keller writes the foreword of and absolutely loves. It's trying to say, right, where's the heart behind the LGBT person? They want to be connected with someone. We get that. We want to be nice and we don't want to condemn it. But when it comes to something on the right, do you do this? Do you go to Mein Kampf and go, what was Hitler really getting at with this kind of stuff about the Jews? Is there something there we can tap into? We don't do that, and I'm not saying we should do that. Certainly not with Mein Kampf. But I'm saying there are people who are sympathetic to ideas on the right, and of course there are going to be people. There's going to be a gradation of people who are going further and further in that direction, and maybe downstream from Gamergate, these red-pilled men on the right. Red pill, by the way, we didn't footnote this earlier. It's a reference really to the Matrix, isn't it? It's people who say you've got an option of believing the world as you see it and all of the nonsense, the feminism, the woke, the CRT, everything that you hear in the Western world, the direction it's been going for the last, half century plus. You can believe that and carry on with your nice job, or you can take the red pill and you can see the world as it really is, and devoid of all the conspiracy theories and devoid of all the conspiracies that have stopped you from seeing the truth.
Yeah, normies would be the...
Yeah, normies are those who just don't get it. Yeah, they don't get it.
NPCs, which, by the way, is another gaming expression. Non-player character.
Oh, is it?
That's non-player character. If you're an NPC,
of course it is.
You play an RPG or something and you go up to someone in Oblivion or Skyrim or something and they give you their pre-programmed lines and they go about their business, but otherwise they're not actually active in the narrative of the game.
Yeah.
It's really, to be honest, we'll talk about this and we'll talk about more about what you're actually talking about, but it is one of the strangest things that's making me feel really old at the moment, is hearing all this stuff of red-pilled, based, Sigma and Alpha.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I was hearing all this 10, 15 years ago, and it's now coming into vernacular expression. Kids these days are saying Sigma to describe, you know what I mean by that? Like alpha males,
like a beta
males.
Yeah.
Alpha males and then Sigma males are the hierarchy. It's so silly.
Yeah.
But anyway.
But the devil wears Prada. It's trickled down. Go on, Tom.
I'm glad we've got someone to translate in the room.
Yeah, thank you.
Nathan's hours wasted on Reddit forums are not wasted.
Tons of hours wasted in video games.
Yeah. I think two things that come to mind for me, thinking about nominal Christianity, and I don't know if this is the case in America, but is it the right or is it the left that you'd kind of be able to engage with and have a co-belligerence with to engage with kind of nominal Christianity? You look at the likes of Big Eva and like I was certainly there. Like nominal Christianity was viewed as a bad thing. And it was kind of good that like it was becoming harder to be a Christian because the wheat and the chaff were being separated and you can see the wheat better. But I actually kind of reflecting on that and thinking about the whole Christian nationalism piece, I think that's nonsense. You know, we are blessed by being in line with God's will, in line with his commands. So therefore, like we should be kind of having co-belligerents who we would consider building kind of nominal Christianity with. And can you do that on the left? Well, I'm not sure if you can. Can you do that on the right? I don't know. Maybe you can. And like that kind of wanting to latch on kind of history and wanting to engage with kind of conservatism and certainly challenge their view of conservatism. What are they conserving? But I think there's people to be found there. There's a rallying to be done in a way that we can bless our neighbor and our nation through that.
It connects to something we were talking about last week about monarchy, and what I was saying not last. Did I just say last week? It definitely was not last week. Whenever it was, several weeks ago. You know, about monarchy, about how it carries.
How America needs a king.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah. And how monarchy itself communicates something about hierarchy in nature and in politics and in the relation. And think about how the royal family is a family. Yeah. So the height of at the head of government is a familial network, and that says something about society. So I think there's all sorts of reasons why monarchy is a good thing. My point though is this, and this is responding to yourself, Tom, that you're right. If we want to be co-belligerents with the left, we have to do so on a very shallow level, you know, in terms of conclusions, in terms of utility. So let's say, for example, a Christian and a leftist will agree on the fundamental dignity of a woman. And we can work to see that girls in school and girls around the world have that dignity afforded to them in law. Okay, good. That's a conclusion we can agree on. But I would fundamentally disagree with that leftist on what we might use to use the jargon of their metaphysic, like about how they imagine the world, about authority, about hierarchy, about family, about all sorts of things. I share a totally different cosmology, as it were, with that person. Now, and I share that cosmology, I share that metaphysic, I share that view of the world with your average conservative person, be they nominal or otherwise, because they too will agree with me that actually hierarchy is a good thing, and authority is a good thing. Submission is not a dirty word, and the home is a central currency of all things. And so there is a greater ability to be, in your terms, Tom, a co-belligerent with someone on the right, someone conservative. Because we have to put it in these terms, because they share a greater vision of what life actually is. And I think it's because we don't talk in terms of metaphysics anymore. You know, I have a basic metaphysics shared with a conservative person. I do not with a leftist person.
And this is where it comes home to roost with the current issues, because who also shares some of the things you just said? Well, who shared? The Nazis actually did share in some of those. They believed in division, discipline, etc. So therefore, the whole notion of the post-war consensus, which is blowing up the reformed world right now in America and causing all sorts of division in terms of how we see fascism in relation to what's happened post Second World War. I think I referenced this in the last episode. I think, you know, if the soldiers dying for their country, for preserving the Western way of life, see where it's led, if they see the Paris Olympics 2024 and they look back and go, was the Berlin Olympics 1936 just happened to be in Nazi Germany, but clearly everyone's participating in it, so not everyone thought the Nazis was as evil, so evil that they had to boycott the Olympics in 1936, which is odd, really. All the nations are represented there, so they look at that as a contrast, and so these guys who are pushing further to the right are going, maybe we've been lied to and we've been told everything about fascism was wrong for a reason. Now, I don't think as a Christian you should be able to say, I have to choose. I think it was a famous, I heard it referenced on some other podcast, Evelyn Waugh maybe, saying, I shouldn't have to choose. He was English, of course. I shouldn't have to choose between fascism or communism. And I think the danger we have now on the right is people are feeling like it's more of an either or choice and go, maybe the fascists were right, and the reason why they're being squashed is because they were right, and the communists wanted to win, and we allied with the communists, of course, and then then we had the Cold War, but we had cultural Marxism, which continued communist-esque ideas in the West and has completely undercut everything we believed in. We don't have family. We don't have a strong sense of identity. We don't have patriotism, because who was also patriotic? Oh, look, all the fascists, the Italians, the Germans, and therefore we can't be patriotic, because that would ultimately lead to nationalism, and the National Socialists did what they did. And so the really tricky thing to unpick is having these conversations. It's a very sensitive issue, because of course you have people fully, understandably aware of the horrendous suffering the fascists cause, or all of them, especially the Nazis, who were the worst of them by a long stretch. But obviously the communists were equally, it's probably appropriate to say equally bad.
I mean,
because they killed more. They killed more people.
They were worse.
Yeah. So all I mean is, it's hard to. It is hard to. It's a race to the bottom, isn't it? Because you can't. The Holocaust, the systematicity of the Holocaust was so horrendous that does feel worse, because it's like, I'm going to do this, and we're going to. But then Stalin did do the people he didn't like, that he didn't think were, worthy of. He dehumanized. He did the same stuff. He just didn't look as efficient. Coldly efficient as the Germans did. And so it feels like you can't say that the Nazis are not the worst. But I think you're right, Tom, to point to, we're so used to doing that. We said this in the last episode. The Nazis are like the figure, the moral benchmark of evil, rather than a positive moral benchmark of good in terms of Christianity and Jesus Christ. So there's all these things tangled.
It feels like our era, fascism. I mean, because it's Western Europe. It feels like it's our geographical sin. If you talk to someone from Cuba who's fled to Miami, or if you talk to someone who fled from Soviet Russia into Europe, they will tell you in no uncertain terms, a bit like, we're talking about our sin of fascism. They'll say, no, as you just said, Tom, it's worse. It's awful. Communism is an evil doctrine, and it can only and ever lead to forced statist violence. Yeah. And is there something unique about fascism in terms of the grand vision that Hitler had for race purity, and that is unique. You don't see it quite as much in communism.
It's Darwinian as well. It's the first political Darwinian.
That's right.
In a way, yeah.
Again, it's our sin, because Darwin it was English. Yeah. But there is still something. Again, it's like communism is just cold. I don't know how else to put it. Like fascism has this sort of the heat of racial Darwinism, but communism has this cold, unfeeling hatred of anyone who disagrees, and they will just shoot you in the head. There is no humanity to it at all. I mean, fascism does have a vision of humanity. It has a vision of the new man for the Third Reich and the Fourth Reich, but communism just has this coldness about it. Oh, you don't agree? We'll take you behind the bike sheds and shoot you and hang your baby, and we will then go and eat our supper. Yeah, it's cold. It's dead. It's
interesting, because that is, when you think about it, I don't associate. I just don't know any knowledge of it. Maybe someone who's studied the Soviet history in closer detail would know, but you don't see like clips of rousing speeches by the Soviet leaders, but you obviously see the rousing clips of the fascists, Mussolini or Franco or Hitler especially. I mean, you see lots of those clips, and it's like rousing of people into action and garnering their national spirit. Yeah. And that's what I think Joe Rogan showed a clip of an AI-ified Hitler speech, which was translated into English with an equivalent English voice. And we've only ever seen the clips of him looking extremely horrible and angry, and then we assume everything he's ever said is just against Jewish people. Now, of course, Hitler was a horrendous anti-Semite and deserves at least virtually all of the flack he gets for what he did, and has said, even if it's wrong to make him worse than Satan. I think that's just a stupid theological error that our age has made, and doesn't even realize it's theological. It's a theological just disaster to do that, because it actually, I think you made the point in the last episode, Nathan, that it even minimizes the severity of their sin.
Yeah, because they're humans.
Like, they're demons, so they would do that. They're Nazis. They would be horrendously evil. No, they are sinners and accountable to God for their horrendous sin. They're made in God's image, and they've tarred that. Like, we all have marred their image, but they've marred it to a significant degree. Anyway, you see the speeches, and you go, oh, you can see why people were. He wasn't just talking about. He's talking about his own passion I've poured myself out for this nation. I've done this and this, and or, like any politicians, pointing to their own good, but also there is a sense of the national spirit, and that's what the Germans have won over to. The patriotism, we can believe in something because we couldn't during Weimar Germany, where our our pride was completely taken away from us, and many would say wrongly. Or it was too harsh on them, the Treaty of Versailles, etc. Of course, Hitler used that and used it to his advantage and was able to whip up a storm. But at the same time, this is why people look back into the history. And if all they're hearing is you're not allowed to have any sympathy for any of the concerns that the Nazis tapped into, because otherwise you'll probably become a Nazi. They're young men who are curious, who see, well, okay, I don't think the world that you guys have created feels like a world I want to live in. I'm going to take my red pill and let's see how far we can go down this rabbit hole. And some go all the way and they become Nazis, and some go, we need to recover some of the things that the fascists were trying to defend. Presumably there were people who were pro-fascist in the 30s who were Christian, who didn't hate people who were not like them. Presumably, I mean, it's kind of that's the challenge we have, because we naturally go, they're all demons, and they know none of them had anything, that we can possibly renovate and ensure that we actually filter through the lens of Scripture.
Are we not? I don't know, Nathan. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts on it. The Treaty of Versailles. It feels like today, obviously, that's been scrutinised in the past, but today it's not something that we talk about. It's not something that's scrutinised. Are we not effectively setting ourselves up? Are we not imposing a Treaty of Versailles on the right and just perpetuating? I don't know where that idea has come from.
It's a good point, Tom. I mean, the essence for me, if I was to define the Treaty of Versailles, if I was to characterize it, it would be a desire not just for restitution but for humiliation.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the essence of it. Terms of repayment, for example, which you wouldn't have paid back for decades upon decades. It was true. It was a true attempt to humiliate. Now, and this is not an original thought. I think you get taught this, or you used to in school, but that the Treaty of Versailles inadvertently, in its desire to humiliate, to truly subjugate and to dominate the enemy, which is, I suppose, quite a masculine urge, actually laid the path for German feelings of disaffection, and ultimately, of course, for Hitler. That's not an original thought. That's a very common thought, but it's a common thought because it's true.
Is that not what we're seeing now? In terms of kind of engagement on the right, like if we're just going to shun and shame, like are we not just going to get a repeat of that in that way? We talk about the post-war consensus, like this is flipping that.
Yeah, this is exactly why we're seeing young men becoming more conservative. It's because they're being told year after year after year, again, going back to Gamergate days, remember, it really does go back to then, because you can't have male characters in your video games, guys. You can't be seen in an advert. You have toxic masculinity. You're not allowed to be the hero. If you're going to watch any media, you're going to be seeing a 5-foot woman dominate you who weighs 100 pounds, and you're going to see them dominate men. You can't have any of your heroes. The heroic age is over. All your old classical heroic stereotypes have to be subverted. There has to be something wrong. The villain is actually the one who is really the... And it goes over and over and over again. And men, when they come of age, and growing up in that, will have such a deep sense of resentment and such a deep sense of displacement and alienation from the mainstream. So what then happens, and I think this is explaining why we're seeing a turn to far right stuff, they start to think, if you were wrong about all of that, why aren't you wrong about everything else you told me in school about history? Why aren't you wrong about the fact, maybe it's like I just said about BNP, Nick Griffin. It's like, oh, maybe they were wrong about him. And actually, as it turns out, they were right about some things. But my point is, it's a natural urge for young men to go, oh, you've called me, you've treated me like dirt for 10 years, especially now. Think about these young guys who've been raised up through school. They're coming of age in this life, in this time. You've treated me like dirt on your shoe. You've shown me that you've got no place for me. Right, fine. This whole spectrum of more rightist political opinion has a home and a place for me, and it says that my masculinity is good.
And this is exactly right. This is where the Nietzschean stuff comes in, because this is what Jordan Peterson was able to tap into with his when he arrived on the scene around 2014, actually, as well. More famous 2016-17, but it was tapping into these men who were completely disenfranchised, and around the same time, you've got those people who are tapping into Bronze Age ideas. There's the Bronze Age mindset of we need to scale back, which would be Nietzschean in the sense that Christianity is a weakness and Christianity is bad for us. We need to return to a kind of vitalism where we are making ourselves strong and we are getting away from this modern sense where men are kind of fattened and are sat behind desks and academics and people who are, it's just, and it's almost an anti-intellectualism, but not because they're not clever. Some of these people in that world are very clever, but they're winning a lot of men to them. But they're in a weird way, though they seem like they would have lots of virtues and ideals because they're hearkening back to something historic, the Greco-Roman, pre-Christian, they actually are Nietzschean in the sense that they want to nillify. The Nietzschean nihilism was, I'm removing the categories of morality that I thought were true. And so that's to reverse the Tom Holland thesis, which is that the West is really built on Christianity, the virtues of Christianity. And woke even is like a Christian heresy because it comes out of like the Good Samaritan gone bad. Inclusivity, tolerance is like a Christian virtue, but it's one that's then been truncated and they've cut off all of the roots from it. So they're going, no, we need to go behind that. That Christianity has led to woke in a way. Some of those goes on the further right, they're not Christian at all. But then you've got the Christians who are going, okay, we appreciate some of this vitalism. We do think men have been softened and fattened and effeminized by this modern technological world that the men actually built. And Anthony Isler makes that point in his great book, No Apologies, about the modern world built by men, that feminists now complain that they are oppressed in, but they wouldn't even be able to tell you that without all of the infrastructure that men like risked their lives to build for many years.
And not just that, but if men decided to not let, if in some, and it would be a dystopian world, hear me, but if suddenly, all of a sudden, men said, no, we don't want to hear you anymore, those women wouldn't be heard.
Yeah, and that's the fear that they have of The Handmaid's Tale, of course, in terms of women being oppressed by some great Christian sort of dystopia, totalitarian state, which is just the nonsense, like almost like a weird nightmare of the feminist left, which is everyone on the left, really. Everyone's feminist on the left, I would say, arguably. That the Christian nationalist thing that Tom mentions there, the thought of creating a cultural Christianity that, yes, we want conversions and we want revival, we want real heart religion, but you actually also just want Christian values in society regardless, because they're going to be way better than this like God-defying nonsense on the left. They would go, well, that's what we're scared of, because then you're going to make this situation, Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood, where women are, subjugated and are forced into pregnancy because they need to keep that human race up. So even people who are otherwise quite rational-ish worry even about the normal centre-right. Everyone in the Britain and centre-right knows about the population crisis. And so people are fearful of this conflation of, Christian nationalism, or at least the idea that Christian nation's a good idea, and population crisis. That means that when they get in, they're going to make all the women do this, but you're right to say that if men didn't have Christian virtue restraining them and decided, right, let's just return to our like natural state. We're just going to completely domineer, and we're going, they'll win.
It's a strange thought, but it does follow that the world as it exists now it exists because men let it exist.
Yeah.
And if men didn't want it to exist, it would stop.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying it with any relish. I'd much rather a world in which, as you say, Christian virtue characterizes the man in this world such that he loves his wife and he loves his sisters in the faith, and he seeks to protect all women and children, and he wants to give them a voice and wants to see girls educated. And I'm not having a problem with any of that.
Chivalry.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good world to live in. It's the one that the church has built. But this world, even the world in which we have raging feminists, exists by men's consent.
Yeah.
It's a weird thought, isn't it?
It's completely true. It's chivalry plus cowardice, and that's why it's been so destructive. Because it's like, I can't oppose her, I can't oppose this woman or this feminist because I'll look bad. That's the cowardice element. But it's also, she seems really passionate about this. I want the best for her in my chivalrous mindset. So I'll also, I won't cross, and I also won't have an argument with a woman in public, because it's almost like the ideological equivalent of having a fight with a woman. So that chivalry would kick in there. But when you mix that with the cowardice of, I know this is not true, but I'm going to allow it because it would cause me too much reputational trouble to oppose it, that's how we've gotten where we've gotten. So you're completely right that's where we end up. Just to shift us on towards, I guess, from feminism, I guess, to back to the issues on the, I guess, the race stuff, and where we're out on the outer end of the post-war consensus and the Nazis. Just to move on to the recent reform and scuffles. So we've talked about the ways in which, and how they relate to Britain especially. The situation we have, of course, with post-war consensus, so we've got these people questioning these ideas they've been told. They're therefore also, some of them are going to go towards Holocaust denial, which is a crime in virtually every Western nation, or more likely and far more majority would be questioning the way in which the Holocaust is instrumentalized to perpetuate the modern world that we have. In the same way that people feminists have a go at the evils of patriarchy in the past. So they will accentuate every possibility, like every marriage would have had marital rape. The men just controlled everything. It was so evil and terrible. I put a post up on X a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday, of one of those many pictures of men going down to the mines, shoved in like canaries into these boxes, and these two women kind of sending them on their way. And I was like, male privilege. This is the patriarchy that feminists are desperate to remind us. But the vast majority of men are working extremely hard for their families. Yes, there would have been men who are oppressing women in all sorts of ways, but there's all sorts of oppression that happens everywhere. So it's just that same thing applied to the oppression of Jewish people or the oppression of other races, for example. So yes, these things are true and evil and need to be called out, of course. Of course. But how are they being instrumentalized in order to keep people silent on other issues? Because then as soon as if you just mention the Holocaust, you can't really have the conversation kind of dies there. It's like when you call someone a Nazi or someone calls you a Nazi. Like, okay, we're not really going to go any further here because you've now brought in this monumentally significant evil that we can't really progress from. Like whether it is like rape or racism or anti-Semitism, if someone's accused of that, the emotive power of that it just causes an impossible disconnect. And so in that context, we're trying to go, right, how do we retrieve what some of those people were trying to get at in critiquing multiculturalism and critiquing some of these issues? When in Britain especially, the right post-war was deliberately suppressed. And I mean like someone like Oswald Mosley or something, who obviously... Oswald Mosley has all sorts of problems. He's the leader of the British fascists. But I'm just so dubious about the way in which he is depicted now even in popular culture. So I think, Tom, you watch Peaky Blinders, don't you? Or you have seen it? I've not seen it. I just watched the clips of it.
It was a ludicrous display.
I watched it, I was like, this was like me trying to do some research and going, because I'd heard a speech by Mosley and thought, okay, there's definitely things that in hindsight, the people on the right look at him and go, when he was saying, why don't we protect Britain's identity? We don't need to get involved in this war because Hitler hasn't said he's going to go and take over Britain.
It was pantomime.
Yeah.
It was pantomime. And I did watch Peaky Blinders, and it was one of the latter seasons, wasn't it?
And they called him the devil himself, I think.
Yeah, and he's portrayed as like this ravaging, sexually charged animal.
Yeah.
Now, he did actually have some sexually, very, very sexually questionable practices, but he was displayed in that as some sort of coke-addled, almost demonic.
It was
bestial.
manipulative. It was supremely manipulative. He did seem kind of extremely demonic in it, and I thought this is just dubious. The BBC putting this out is just.
And when I'm watching it, I'm thinking. I said this when my wife and I watched it. I'm thinking to myself, this is just propaganda. This is just, and that's fine. And I'm comfortable with that because lots of modern media is, and I know that.
You've been made comfortable with it.
Yeah,
I guess.
And I'm watching, like when I'm watching the example I gave to you, Aaron, and another friend we've got, Owen Edwards, is like I sent this picture through when I was watching Line of Duty of a picture of a SWAT team. And there's like three, like imagine a line of a SWAT team in shadow, in silhouette, because it's meant to look all cool. And there are 5 of them, and one of them is a 5-foot woman. Yeah. And it's the most absurd silhouette. Like you're watching it, and I paused the TV and I took a picture and sent it to you guys. So I'm well aware of how like propaganda works in modern media. Okay, fine. So I'm watching. Okay, that's fine. I wonder if someone in Soviet Russia is like, oh yeah, this is just obviously untrue.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm watching it. I'm thinking this is nonsense. This is just pantomime that's designed to elicit a certain thing, clearly communicating some things are forbidden, some things aren't, some things are acceptable, some things are unacceptable. And I watch it on that level. I'm like, all right, fine. I've kind of switched my historical brain off. I wasn't watching Peaky Blinders for history anyway. But it was absurd.
It's extremely, but doesn't it? It's playing with fire, I think, because you don't need to demonize someone who you already think is wrong. So I think Mosley was obviously wrong on loads of stuff, but I also think that if you demonize him as worse than that, people are going to start asking questions. The kind of guys we're talking about are going to go, maybe this Mosley guy is kind of good. Now, I actually think if you listen to some of it on multiculturalism, he would not be very different from loads of people. I think we would share quite a lot of opinions in terms of what's at stake in terms of British identity. He obviously made a comeback in terms of, he had a few media interviews. If you look him up on YouTube, you can see him talking quite rationally. He's an extremely intelligent person and didn't think the Nazis were great, but he did in the 30s not have a problem with the Nazis. He got...
Neither did the king.
Well, indeed, Edward VIII. Yeah. But I mean, so Mosley got married in, I think, his second marriage, one of his many moral weird things, but he got married in Goebbels' house in like 1930, maybe 3 or 4. I can't remember, or maybe it was pre. I can't remember if it was pre-Hitler coming in or not. But either way, you're going to have a hard time rubbing that off your CV. So anyone who goes, Mosley's quite a good guy, actually, you could just put the picture of him getting married at Goebbels' house, and you're like, okay, this is going to be a hard one to shake off. But even so, Chamberlain is talking with Hitler in 1938. And and obviously not in favour of him, but thinking, okay, he's not going to go any further. So we naturally think anyone who wasn't as abjectly, demonising the Nazis as we do now, they must be terrible. But most of the British politics, Churchill actually stood out as the warmonger, and of course that's what people are questioning now, who was saying, no, he can't be trusted. But loads of other people did. So everyone else, a lot of people were duped by Hitler. I think Hitler did have designs that he didn't always communicate in those situations, and we should rightly use him as a horrendous example of it. But at the same time, I think it's a different situation to what we're dealing with now. And what we have now is we can't even go to these sources anymore because they were suppressed. So in Britain, I think the BBC refused to cover anything by Mosley and his set for something like 10, 15 years.
Yeah, they threw out habeas corpus, didn't they? And they put him in jail.
So it was just like, we can't hear these things. And kind of, maybe that's okay you can understand, like, the kind of suffering that the Nazis caused. You don't want any immediate, it's the same reason they destroyed all the Nazi sites, because they don't want people gathering at these places in Germany, and they don't want any revival.
Well,
they
did the same thing in Japan as well.
Yeah.
Denazification, especially in Germany, was a major issue. Yeah, I mean, here in the UK, it was part of a wider trend. I mean, the government during World War II took more liberties away from the people than at any point arguably in British history. And the tax level, I mean, until recently, was absolutely horrendous. You just look at anything to do with the Ministry of Agriculture and what they did to farms in World War II. I mean, they had the power to come and just close you down and take your property forcibly. And some people now go, "What's the problem with that?" Well, thank you, Rachel Reeves. But it was genuinely it was part of a wider trend of, rightly or wrongly, a feeling of existential threat, and therefore we can throw away certain civil liberties, habeas corpus, another thing. I think the better example for me, rather than Oswald Mosley, who genuinely did have some very, very questionable things about him, but I do see what you're saying though about the demonization, is Enoch Powell. I think he's a better example of someone who
probably liked Mosley, I presume. And no, he did. I think he did.
I wouldn't know.
Mosley,
if I'm honest, I could not tell you precisely what he thought of Oswald Mosley.
I think he was part of his party when he was younger.
Well, in any case, here is someone who was principally demonized, not primarily for that, but for his Rivers of Blood speech, where, of course, he wasn't even saying that, he was quoting it from someone. Yeah. And when I was raised in the 90s, in the Northeast, you'd sit down all together, because we used to have unified culture back then, and you'd watch the television, and you would, as a family, and you'd watch these talking head shows. And around the turn of the millennium, they were really, really popular. Do you remember them?
Yeah.
I love 2000. I love 1970. I love, and it went through, the BBC went through all the years. Point is, they were looking back. It's really interesting. You watch the old replays on YouTube and stuff, and they had such a political agenda. Again, everything is propaganda, so you're going to get something. You're going to get an agenda of some sort. Point is, when it got round to the issues of Enoch Powell, I remember being in my living room, and my mum was like, "Oh, Enoch Powell, awful man," and a lot of this stuff as well with
Surely your dad and your uncle didn't think that, right?
Not as much, no.
It's like we shared that kind of
the road trip down
apocryphal
from
road trip where they were just letting loose on their political opinions. This was like way before we were ready for that. It was quite funny.
I'm not at all suggesting that my mum was bad for thinking that. I'm just saying that when we were watching this, that the talking heads on all sorts of shows would share universally a position about Enoch Powell, that he was some sort of monster.
Yeah.
And then you start watching the interviews with Enoch Powell, and especially his interviews in America, and you're like, his positions on race are like, oh, that's just like what everyone else believes.
Yeah.
He just had a concern for immigration that would have been too high in the 1960s, which was tens of thousands, not the hundreds of thousands. And you think to yourself, wow, he was properly demonized unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And he was an incredibly clever man.
Very clever. And put his neck out, didn't he? To kind of
and I'm not hear me,
hits.
I know I'm not suggesting he's a perfect man. The only perfect man is Christ Jesus. What I'm saying is that there was a cultural zeitgeist that you were handed down, and then you come later in life to question it. And I think that's what's happening now with younger audiences who are being fed very explicitly progressive stuff in school, coming out the other side going, what else isn't true?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the fundamental issue here.
Exactly. So this is where we're going to wrap up at some point, but the Antioch Declaration comes into this. Okay. So this is something that we don't need to go to town. There's all sorts of, podcasts and blog posts about that already. So you can go and look it up. This was something that came out as we record this just last week, but you would think it happened, a year ago, the amount of commentary that's been sort of concentrated on it in the last week and the controversies and divisions it's already caused. This was in relation to this issue that we've been talking about. It's how people who care about reaching these men and how they reach them, even if they have askew views, even if they were like a full-on Mosleyite, okay, or whatever it would be, or a fully devotee of Powell and some of these figures, and even let's say they have different views on the Nazis than most of us would have. How do you reach those people? Do you kick them out of your church when they express those views? That's at the centre of some of these recent issues. In the Presbyterian denomination that Doug Wilson is part of, the CREC, they do get people turning up at these churches sometimes with some of these views, and they probably have a range to them. They're not people coming and going, hey, Hitler was actually a Christian prince who's really, if we hadn't opposed Hitler, fascism would have prevailed, and we would have had Europe still as functioning nations, and everything would have been great. Whereas we would probably say no, we'd probably be speaking German by now. And it would be very different.
And the rot started before Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. Yeah,
started in the 1920s, if not before.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of the desecration of Europe was already there, and I think this is so. How, as Christian churches, how do you reach those people? Do you? This happened with a certain pastor called Joel Webben in the US, who Tom and I both met. We went to his conference earlier this year in Texas, who had someone in his church who shared a Holocaust meme with someone else in a private chat, not publicly, just with a couple of other people. Not funny and just like a kind of silly joke, but maybe even is the kind of joke that some, I don't know, what's the word? Sort of gadfly type absurdist Jewish comedians might have laughed at if they had some other opinion on the way the Holocaust was instrumentalized. You know how Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Yes.
A bit like Larry David, like that. He could laugh sometimes about some of that a little bit. You can see that in Jewish because there's obviously a history of
like
comedy
when he pretends to be more Jewish in order to get in with someone to get tickets. Do you remember that?
Exactly, yeah.
He's
to get
almost
to the
like
synagogue.
stereotypically Jewish.
Yeah. So like, you can get away with that because he's Jewish. And so maybe there's a whole thing about, because we're just a bit like a black person using the N-word, whereas a white person couldn't. That whole thing. So, but this person shared this meme about the notion of the Holocaust being a myth, but it's a joke, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean the guy's a denier, but it's clearly stupid, and it's clearly something that you'd want to talk to this person about.
Am I right in thinking the joke was it was like a mum and a daughter talking or something, and the daughter's asking, what was the Holocaust in effect? And the mum says it was when Jews were made to work and
do manual labour.
Do manual labour and they all died. Or something like that.
The first time they were asked to do manual labour and they really,
really, really stupid.
So it is stupid and not even funny, and like, but Is that so? That's something you would, if you're a pastor, that's something you want to talk to this person about. Go, it's interesting. Like, why do you find that funny? But some look at that and go, oh, you should let people joke about what they want. Well, no, because actually, like if you had someone joking about rape or joking about racism, it does seem like you're belittling it, which is slightly different to, let's say, our father's generation, where they would tell jokes which stereotype people, which we wouldn't tell, but we look at and go, and then they would go, I don't know what's going to happen to the world. The reason everyone has some kind of pseudo-racist uncle, I wasn't referring to your uncle, but I just kind of mentioned him earlier. I just mean everyone has stuff where they speak differently to the next generation. And some of those jokes aren't them being racist, but they do have clearer lines of separation in a way that Paul could say Cretans are always liars. We wouldn't even say that now of a certain group. All of the people in Crete are liars implicitly. He's tapping into a stereotype that is recognized as true.
Yeah, I don't think you cannot, as in, I don't think it's impossible to conceive of a funnier Holocaust joke. But I struggle as a non-comedian to know what that would look like. It's more a case of, in that instance, it was just lame, and it felt nasty. Yeah,
well, yeah, but also it's not unrelated. This is the key thing. Why I say it isn't just about a meme; it's about the related issues to that, which is this. It's not like this person is like doing the thing that schoolboys do, where you just try and push the envelope a bit further and say something that you shouldn't say. I mean, that's a normal schoolboy thing to do, I would say. This person is a schoolboy. I don't know how old he was, but he's not an older man, but he's an adult. And he also has sympathy to all of these, not only challenging the post-war consensus, but sympathy towards Hitler and the Nazis. So he's gone down that rabbit trail. He's listening to Corey Mahler, who's an excommunicated Lutheran in the US, who's it clearly is racist and clearly is not only a Nazi sympathizer, but perhaps, a neo-Nazi of some kind. From what I've heard of him or seen of the stuff he puts out there, it's kind of really obvious and out there. He is a problem, but it's so fringe, it's kind of crazy. Now, what people are worried about in the mainstream, I say the mainstream of the right, we're not talking about Tim Keller world here, we're talking about people on the right in the kind of, who are challenging these issues. They're concerned that thousands of people are listening to this stuff on their kind of dark web podcasts and picking up some stuff from it. And even if they're not swallowing it all whole, that it's dangerous enough that they should be totally disassociating in the way that Paul would say, Hymenaeus and Philetus' teaching is gangrenous and you shouldn't go near it. So when I was saying earlier about the Chris Watkin thing, we're being nice and building bridges to the left, how would we build bridges to the right? I would actually say, sometimes, like with CRT, it's okay to say we're not going to play games with CRT in the same way the Southern Baptist blew up with Tom Askell a few years ago. We don't want to just say critical race theory is an analytic tool that's useful. We want to say it's evil. So similarly, the likes of Doug Wilson and others, Joe Boot and all the Ezra guys, Jeff Durbin and who else was on there? Well, there's a whole other thing relating to that, who the collaborators were, and that's the unfortunate word they use for the signers of this document, the original signatories. They're trying to say, we need to cut this off and not play games with it. So I actually do understand that logic, and there are some bridges that should not be built. I mean, Doug Wilson's No Quarter November this month was about burning bridges. And so actually I do understand. When I saw that video, and I was like, okay, this is going to be an interesting month and challenging. And it is challenging. It's causing divisions between people who should be allies, because it implicates people not who are racist and pro-Nazi, but people who are wanting to reach these people and have more patience for their different views of history than the guys in the mainstream. And so in the middle of an actual dispute about this Holocaust meme scenario, where one of the guys who, a German pastor, Tobias, you even might pronounce his second name, Riefen Schneider, I think. I'd not heard of him before, but he's in these circles. And he had publicly spoken about this problem and highlighted Joel Webben as a problem, because he's the kind of pastor where people who share these kinds of memes are okay in that church and he should be under church discipline. Joel Webben then responds also publicly saying, I'm not just going to excommunicate someone like a monkey. You can't just say dance monkey, excommunicate. Mm-hmm. Now, Joel also then said something pretty unhelpful, which he then publicly apologised for, which I was delighted by, because I was like, oh, that's not good. And he just said about this other guy, look, the young men are going to keep coming to me, and then no one's going to remember your name. he was doing the meme in the sense of that Achilles in Troy thing. But anyway, so Joel says this. It looks very arrogant. It was arrogant. But he's also pointing to a kind of truth, which is that I'm trying to reach this younger generation. You're not. And if you carry on just demonizing anyone who has a different view on these right-wing issues, which are too hot for you to handle, you're going to not reach them. So that the tension is between where do we draw the line and go, you don't go anywhere near Corey Marler et al., which I don't think, certainly Joel Webber et al. Are not going anywhere near that. But where do you draw the line between we need to cut it off like gangrene to we want to accommodate people who have different views and are on some kind of journey and who get loads of other stuff that's right? And that's the challenge that we have. And because that all went into the public domain and it shouldn't have done, it's and still unresolved as we record this. It's a still unresolved issue. But last week, Tobias, that German pastor, is one of the main collaborators on this document, which is called the Antioch Declaration. It's making all these points that most Christians would look at and go, yeah, obviously, like you can't fuse Nazi white supremacy with Christianity. There's a lot of the things are quite straightforward, and their concern, the ones who wrote this statement, is to protect pastors and protect parishioners from being influenced by this stuff. And it's just a case of, right, okay, we put it out there, but the timing of it is what is dubious. I've critiqued that, and I've spoken personally with some of those involved in drafting it to say, or involved in supporting it, to say I don't think the timing is great because this looks like an indirect comment on this other situation. But they would say, oh, no, this is about the bigger issues. This is about all these Nazis coming in, and the gospel is at stake. That's why it's Antioch. We're pointing to that moment of the gospel being at stake where Paul, when Paul's writing about this to the Galatians, but saying where he challenged Peter on this issue, the gospel is at stake, and there's another gospel. And this other gospel is this new Nazi thing on the right, which is causing all this hoo-ha and genuine problems. Now, I would say, are we in the same situation that, the confessing church was in 1934 with the Barman Declaration, where they have to put something together that's clearly showing that you can't fuse Aryan supremacy with Christianity, and the likes of Karl Barth, Bonhoeffer are kind of involved in that. Well, no, it's not the same, because we don't have that isn't the pressing threat. They believe it is the threat because they've got these people coming in and they're so worried by it. The challenge is this about reputation as well? Is this about, I don't want to be associated with these deplorables because they're too deplorable? I'm happy to be associated with vaccine deplorables, where the left was saying who's anti-vax or something. I'm happy to be associated with people who have a more robust view on patriarchy or something against feminism, because they'll call us names for that. But if it goes this far, I can't be associated. Even if these pastors are trying to preach the gospel to them and bring them through, they're not happy with them being Nazis. They don't want them to be Nazis, but they want to reach them. And so this is the issue. How far do you go with that?
I think, I don't. Tom, feel free to disagree or interject, or. But for me, as someone who's not on as on Twitter, X, as even you guys are, but even just generally, I'm certainly not on it that much. I don't look at it that much. A lot of this has been incredibly confusing and labyrinthian, and to be honest, kind of cringy at times as well. I don't mean to impugn any one person, but that thing about the young men will come to me, I was like, it's so cringe.
Which he did publicly repent of, which I was glad of. But it was,
Likewise, I say this not to impugn any one person. My personal opinion is that the Antioch Declaration is terribly written. I think it is pretentious, and I think I don't think the creedal format is necessary. I think it was a fundamental misdiagnosing of the moment. Now, who am I to say that? Exactly, who am I? Who am I to say that? But what I would say is the root here is about fathers and sons. That's the root of this whole spat, as far as I can see it. Again, the son's thinking, the son's saying to the fathers spiritually, like looking at the younger guys, looking towards Doug Wilson and James White, and perhaps Joe Boot. I'm not sure. He's Gen X, is he? But certainly looking towards those older generations and thinking, we were told so many things, but you boomers have not given us the whole information. So there's a dishonoring of fathers going on. And I think amongst the fathers, and I will say this really tentatively, I would say there are significant character issues that, because they're being dishonored, and that is wrong, they are lashing out against the younger types and dismissing them as young bucks, young whelps, whose concerns they They simply must submit to the wisdom of their betters.
Sit up, shut. No, what is it? Sit down, shut up.
Sit down and shut up. Yeah. There is a fundamental issue here where actually there needs to be generational healing, and the younger guys need to realize that this boomer generational lens is not a catch-all. So we've used phrases like boomers. It is sometimes helpful, but not only are there members of those individual generations who think very differently from the men, but also there are greater forces at play than just generational ideas. There are things here that we are experiencing that go back 200-300 years, like in terms of progressivism and other things. And you can't boil it down to post-war this or generation boomer that. But also then the older guys, it's so unfortunate that it's fallen into no quarter November.
Yeah, it is. Or maybe deliberate.
Or maybe deliberately, yeah. I think that there is how to put it? I think Doug Wilson is doing anything particularly wrong. I don't know enough to say either way, but I do think it's really unfortunate because it is almost, I do see when I'm reading the comments, I'm seeing some guys saying it's no quarter November and you're not even engaging with us. You're taking many, many quarters. There is a deterioration of trust between the generations that needs to be healed before anyone should be releasing any declaration or creed or anything like that. And again, it goes back to the fact that young guys, we will use you, we want you, and let us talk to you. The first thing, and I will say this as well, and the only time I'll do this, where I'll say, look, I'm an elder at Watch Your Own Church, and the one thing I have seen, I must be honest, I have not seen anyone in my circle talk about Nazism or anything like that. That is just simply not a pastoral issue that we have seen.
Except us on this
Except us right now. But what I have seen are lots and lots of people who get their pastoring from YouTube and and they're getting strange ideas about orthodoxy and Catholicism, but also lots of conspiracies like flat earth stuff and other things. And there is a great problem with young people whose trust in institutions and in authorities has been so eroded that they now think they are getting the short shrift by those elders, and they will go somewhere else. The first thing that I would want to do with a young man who walks in my church who has some sort of far right tendencies is to say, let's talk about these. I want to show you that I care about your ideas, and actually I can see that there is truth even in. There will be some things Hitler says that are true in the same way that when he looks at a clock and says it's 2:30 and it's 2:30, he's right. But I want to first say, okay, there might be some truth here. Let me show you that I take seriously the interplay of ideas and the exchange of ideas. And let me show you this. But in order to do that, there's going to be a need for that person, that young man at some point, to put away YouTube and to actually start talking with real people. And that will mean talking with their elders and actually beginning to trust. When Paul says in Corinthians that he operates in the world with all godliness, sincerity, and frankness, that isn't just for alders and elders. That has to be amongst the younger generation too. There needs to be a restoration of trust. That is, for me, the root issue of a lot of this.
Yeah, really good. Tom, any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very hesitant to say anything in that my observation of this is you're seeing a lot of fighting. I want to extend charity. This conversation really is happening in the States. I'm not American. I've spent very little time there. So really to understand kind of the depth of the issue that is being experienced, I want to assume, if I can make a safe assumption, I do not know, that kind of it's necessary and kind of what is happening is serious enough to make a declaration on it. But I'm hesitant kind of to contribute to the noise that is being created and any kind of spat and division, because that's what it looks like from where I'm stood. It looks like a lot of infighting, and I'm concerned that is what it's feeding. When, I don't know, could a whole bunch of kind of private conversations shut these things down? I don't know, and I don't want to cast judgment. I think some of the stuff Nathan's just said are really interesting, and I acutely feel some of those, and I wonder if just the fact that three of us are having these conversations and we're in fact recording them kind of contributes to that, in that there is a real division, it's probably a better word for that, between kind of some of the older generation and our generation, I'm not lumping this all together, that we want to engage with things and swiftly, and I don't know what it'd be interesting, I don't know, is there a query over kind of what has happened in the church over the past, I don't know, 20 years? Who are the pastors who are like Keller and kind of pro-Keller? that they are quick to stamp out any younger men who have these opinions, who want to pioneer, who want to build things. Yeah, they're going to need correcting, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I'm kind of attracted to is things like the new St Andrews adverts. I think they are epic. That kind of Shackleton-esque like advert for you're going to die. It's going to be an awesome adventure. If we manage it, we're all going to high five each other and we're going to be rich, and we can all talk about it at the pub afterwards. Like, that has a serious allure, I think, to people my age. I certainly feel it. Is there just an epic disconnect between me, this, and kind of the next generation up that are about to kind of, I don't know, they might retire from ministry, but at some point, I'm not sure if they will. I think they will want to keep hold of it because this is something that they've built. This is something that they've taken ownership of, and any threat to it, whether right or wrong, just won't be engaged with.
Yeah,
and I don't know what you do with all that.
Yeah, it's completely right that there's that. I mean, Nathan and I can testify to that. Our experience in churches over the years. I think we had a whole episode on this, didn't we, about men and being kind of pushed down, squashed down. And it's not right for that generation to then just complain and whinge about it. That's what some of the older guys who are defending the Antioch Declaration or the timing of it, they're saying things like, "Hey, look, it's not perfect. We're not saying it's the perfect document, etc." But they are sort of. There is a bit of a sense of like, look, stop whining about it. I think Joe, I'd heard him say on a podcast to say, we like what we've done rather than what others haven't done about this pressing problem. And I can absolutely understand the need. I actually do think that something like that statement should be written. But I mean, like in a future tense, and just to say it had to get done. No one else was saying anything, and if we carry allowing this to happen, Nazis are going to take over the church. Almost, is that how it feels? I was like, no. Again, Barmen Declaration. Adolf Hitler is in power in Germany, and Lutheran Christians are allowing Nazis in and refusing to preach on subjects that will go against Nazi ideology, and anti-Semitism is becoming a kind of Christianized doctrine. Hitler has written Mein Kampf a decade earlier over and has been in the public consciousness, and you can see what he thinks about Jewish people, and he has the most powerful position in the nation, and the church is on board, but the national church is on board with Hitler. The confessing church had an absolutely emergency situation. They took a heck of a lot longer even to draft that than this declaration has. I mean. And that's because they have a presenting issue, which is an emergency issue, urgent situation to address. Is this the same level where you're willing to put this statement out and it cuts those generations in half? And the sad thing is, the people on the other side of this, Joel Webb, as well as Brian Survey, Eric Kahn, all good brothers who are trying to reach guys on the right, and they're far more effective at it. They will be in future years as well. Is it worth this division? It's already caused a significant amount of hurt. So it does look like we were saying earlier with the it does this matter. You don't have to know all the details of it, but it's the wreckage of it that will set the agenda for the next decade, probably, in terms of how mission works and how we think about these things. So yes, one of those things is challenging this influx of Nazi thinking. We definitely need to do that and want to do it, but don't say we just took it upon ourselves to do it. And
again,
you should just respect the fact that we're older and we know better. And I think, we do want people that to happen. We just want it to be done properly.
But why haven't we seen a declaration of anything pointing to the left? And now I propose that the answer to that is because these things can be resolved through conversation, and and have we decided? And I mean, I think the issue on the left is significantly bigger than this issue we're talking about. Now, but we haven't written anything there, and we haven't kind of made any declaration there, I assume, because those things can be engaged with on an individual level, at the local level, in personal conversations. But then we've just approached it entirely differently. Right? So I don't know. And I kind of don't want to unpack that because I just don't understand.
Wasn't there that thing a few years ago? I'm trying to remember now. There was a declaration against critical theory in 2020.
Yes.
Was this something like James White and Tabiti, not Tabiti, Vodi were I think I'm remembering something, but you're still right though, Tom, that generally speaking we don't find these sorts of moments very often, given the actual threat to the church, which is in progressive thinking. We're surprisingly silent relative to this. But I think for me, as I said, the creedal form of it, the confessional form, just a totally misdiagnosed format, like a misdiagnosed moment, and therefore an ill-judged format. That's people can disagree with me on that, and that's fine. But I just did not see this as a neat. Those moments when you create a confession, declaration, whatever, and it is a form of confession. You've got the we affirm, we deny sort of structure.
Yeah.
Those are really particular moments, as you say, Aaron, when you're responding to a great existential need, or you need to witness to the world in a particular direction on a particular issue. I do not.
Yeah, and just to say, I actually do think. I don't think that necessarily a confessional format is wrong. I just wanted it to happen. Further in the future, away from that.
Well, I was going to say in response to that, I think an alternate form. I'll tell you what I think should have happened instead. It's more akin to the need for the collection. Was it 12 volumes on the fundamentals? You remember in the early 20th century?
Yeah.
It's more akin to that moment than it is to a Barman Declaration moment.
Yeah.
This should have been a collection of essays against this issue. And that's what this should have been. More considered, more substantial. They wanted to have this conversation, engage with these ideas, show that they take it seriously. It should have been a volume of essays on this issue. And then that might well have started a new series of fundamentals.
Yeah.
That's what it should have been.
Yeah.
And they're saying, we haven't done this hastily. You did it in a few weeks, nowhere near long enough to think what could be the better format here.
Yeah.
Would this be better served as, again, a new series of fundamentals? And I would say absolutely it would have been.
And I heard Doug Wilson use an analogy. I'll be interested to know what you guys think of this. I know we'll kind of come into land soon, but which I'll just keep saying until darkness comes upon us. No, I will bring us in. I know. So Doug Wilson used an analogy of a submarine allowing water in. So, and you might have had people who have been told to stop that leak, and then they haven't done it. And at some point, you have to seal off whatever part of it is, even if you hear them screaming. I think that's... I'm not misjudging the analogy. In that analogy, like, the young people are left to drown, are they not, in that? I think you heard it too, right? It's on the Cosmopolitan episode. Yeah. I think that's what it is. It's like we're shutting you out because you're not doing anything about the leak, and we can't let the whole submarine go down. So we're going to... I know we're on the same team. We were... Now, if you're not going to do anything about it in the way that we see it, we're going to shut it down. There's a paternalistic element to that, which, yes, absolutely, we need to honour our fathers. And I think online, there's some of the stuff that's said about Doug Wilson and others, just, from the Anon accounts and stuff, is a real problem. Even though they might, like everyone's got a tinge of truth about some. The things that they're pointing out may often be correct or partially correct. The way they go about it is really unpleasant and just un-Christian. And I think... that needs to be sorted out, but it's not going to happen with a paternalistic. We all have literal parental authority over you. Because remember, we've used this language, and even people the good guy, I think, who are good guys, the Ogden guys, for example, and even Joel Webb, and even if I wouldn't agree with everything he says publicly, obviously, or the style, but I do actually think, generally speaking, their heart is in the right place, genuinely is, and I've seen real graciousness in the stuff that's been said about him in response. I don't think I've seen the same graciousness across the board from the older generation. I've seen a far more combativeness in some of those debates. And I just think that Tom's point is correct. And I think I've tried wherever I can when I've spoken to some of these people involved to urge personal conversation, private conversation first. If you have a problem against another brother, Jesus tells us what to do. Go and tell them everything you think about them in your assumption, and let them defend themselves. And if they then let's say something publicly, which they sort of doesn't reflect your conversation, okay, maybe you can then go, I think this person's, it's not quite right. So this whole issue of like going personally, and then you can go public, but also having just more heat taken out of them debates where you can just say, let's have a Stephen Wolfe and a Joe Boot in the room and someone else and have a debate about these issues, what ethno-nationalism and the dangers that might be coming with American Christian nationalism, where white Americans might just prefer themselves and use certain arguments. What are the problems with that? Let's see what you think. And you think, let's see where there's, are these issues to divide over, or are they issues that we can work together?
But you see, a wise insight here would have been that goes right to the heart of it. Not to repeat myself too much, but the essence of this is trust. There needs to be a trust from younger generations for your older.
Yes.
They need to be, and therefore the older ones need to trust the younger, and to take that sort of more mediated approach in which you don't cast one another off as hopelessly boomer or hopelessly, whelpish. It would have been not only to address this. It wouldn't have just been to put out the fire, but would have been to clad the house with fireproof.
Yeah.
It would have been to address the very issue that is at play. And my disappointment has been on both sides. Yes, I'm not trying to straddle both sides, but yes, I'm disappointed in the younger guys that they take this approach and they speak so disparagingly about the older generation.
Which you mean the nonners, by the way, not the leaders. Some of the leaders,
of course. You're right. That's a good point from the anonymous account, the sort of the blue-eyed account types, but at the same time, from the older guys, as you said, that sort of paternalistic attitude is exactly what this issue is. You see what I'm saying? That paternalistic attitude is precisely going down to the very nub of it, why the younger generations are rejecting you, and to indulge it, or at least not to combat it properly, and not to take a wiser, older, fatherly approach, not to actually assert, I am your father and I will love you even as I see you going astray.
Yeah.
I just see it as a fundamental misstep.
I think that's a really good, that is the key. Go on, Tom.
I wonder, I'm wanting to drag it back to this side of the pond. Like I've witnessed conversations, I suppose a couple over the past year maybe, where there has been citation of an older pastor or minister will even ask, how old are you? And reference their number of kind of years of experience. And I mean, that promotes the conversation that Nathan, you've just cited.
Yeah, that's right.
And like that doesn't contribute to conversation. And that the sad thing is that if that is at the core of some of these things, and thinking about, what does it do in the UK, it's going to fuel the things that they're concerned by. Sadly,
it's part of a wider cultural trend, because this is one of the more insightful comments made about Peter Hitchens, say, for example, who has taken in recent months a very strangely dismissive attitude towards, around the election, when he was saying you shouldn't vote for Labour, but you shouldn't vote for the Tories either. And there were people saying, well, hang on a second, I don't want to just sit back and see my nation.
He's been blackpilled for a while, Hitchens, hasn't he?
And one of the greater insights into Hitchens' character is that he seems to want to protect institutions, and if you are younger than him, he doesn't seem to regard your opinion as worth much at all. And so what I'm saying is this is part of a wider trend. As I say, the reason why people are falling into far-right politics is because they don't trust what they have had handed down to them.
From their fathers, exactly.
From their fathers. And the fathers need to take back control of this and say, you are my son, I love you, I respect you, I will not despise you for your youth.
Absolutely, exactly right. That's that's the citation from Paul to Timothy. This is the difference. Just remember that we use this language of, I'm your father in the faith because I've done this many debates or whatever it is. I've been in ministry for 30 years and you've only been in ministry for this many years. Those kind of things that's not how a father talks. It's not how a father needs to talk, because there's a relational trust there, as you say, Nathan. And Paul and Timothy, Paul does say that to Timothy, don't let them despise you. And he also says, I have listened to Timothy, my son in the faith. I have no one else like him. I mean, I just think, imagine if you're Timothy hearing from the Apostle Paul that the Apostle Paul has said that in a letter to a church about you. I have no one else like him, and calling Timothy to imitate me as I imitate Christ. Of course, that's what everyone thinks they're doing, but there's an actual relationship there. So some of these people are saying, I am your father in the faith because I'm older. That isn't how Paul talks about fatherhood. It's an actual relationship. This goes back to, these young men need to be in local churches and need to be discipled by actual men in their lives and not by the internet. And therefore, those older figures, of course, there's going to be some sense of conceptual fathering in the faith, but it isn't what Paul said to Timothy, because Paul knew Timothy. He knew what he was like, and he was willing to come out to bat for him, because Paul having to say that to Timothy obviously means he's saying that because people are looking down on Timothy and saying, what do you know? And in some of that, maybe Pharisaic culture, they might have kind of crept in to be like, well, we've been around longer. We've studied the scriptures longer than you. So what do you know? But then Paul comes out to defend him. And that's really, really key.
And those with eyes to see and ears to hear will obviously also discern in what we're discussing a connection to the experience of many young guys. In fact, Tom, you've already said it. many young guys in churches who are in these churches with perhaps even dynastical systems of authority, church leadership, sort of families taking charge.
Yeah,
I've seen that. But certainly older generations who will not give any inch to the younger chaps, who will not give any sort of
quarter.
No quarter, indeed. And so this is what we're saying. We're putting our finger here on a much wider trend within society and within other things, rather than it being about Nazis and Aristotle and all that other silliness. This is about fathers, sons, trust and love between generations. And there was a better approach than a declaration to give to your son. One of the fondest moments you remember with your dad is not when he sits you down and spanks your bottom necessarily, but when he says, "Come in here and take that tool and do this for me, unscrew this for me. Actually, be of use and come here and I value I value your time and I want to actually include you in this task and exercise." That's what that means. That's what that looks like. That's what these guys need, and it will show them that there is actually a system of authority and hierarchy of authority that is valuable.
Yeah, and it's not just saying exactly. It's not. They will probably say, the older generation saying, well, we still need to discipline and correct our sons. Absolutely, you do. Firstly, are they your sons spiritually, or are they people who look up to you because they've read your books and they, like your content? This is great. That isn't biblically what a son is necessarily. There is, of course, a way of, as I've said, a conceptual father in the faith, those who've gone before you, and with the way the Hebrews talks about your leaders, imitating them. But yeah, so they do need to bring correction, but they do it in an attitude of love, and they do it always and manfully, which means confronting them personally. I have to confront my son sometimes, but at the same time, they know, and I hope I'm doing a bad job if I'm not communicating it to my own sons. They know that any correction comes in an environment of love, so they will know that I'm taking them on special missions. That's why I take my daughters on special dates, one of them out, and I take the boys. They don't get a date; they get a mission. So we go and do something. We go and try to accomplish. It might be me taking stuff to the dump, but asking for my son to help me in that gives him dignity and it allows him to come alongside the journey.
That's exactly the word.
But it's the whole conception of they know that I'm for them, and I'm not just cutting them off. I'm not shutting them out of the submarine. So I don't know how many conversations were had to say you must. I don't know. Whatever it was, conversations
what a father does in the submarine? They cut themselves off.
Yeah,
for the sake of the sons.
Yeah,
that's what the son. And the word that you just said about dignity is important here. That is exactly what these young people need. They need a sense of, we're not stupid for noticing problems since Second World War.
Yeah.
No, you're not stupid. You're not stupid. Yeah. There are problems. There is. I was watching a podcast earlier, and I won't name who it was. But they were talking about the post-war consensus, and he put it in quote. He was one of the main actors. He put it in quote marks so disparagingly. Sorry, you can't do that. There is really a thing called a post-war consensus. It really does speak to something real. You can't belittle the convictions and the insights of this younger generation like that. Yeah. That will make them feel like they've got no value. They've got no insight. They are picking up on something really real. The problem is that they lack the tools and they lack the fatherhood to be able to go, right, well, which tool should I use for this task? I'm using this tool. Does this work? And the father go, no, it's not that tool. It's this one. Yes. But the problem is real. Yes. Let's work on it together.
Absolutely. And that's a good way to bring the submarine into the port, to use an analogy, which hasn't sunk. And again, the issues of these, we don't want to blow things out of proportion, and we don't want to minimize genuine threats. The issues here on the right are obviously real threats. Are they the same threat as some seem to be making it? Is the submarine about to go down, for example? That's something that's what's up for debate, and more conversation needs to be had, and we hope and pray that it will do. And that's just a good prayer point. And those of you listening to this who know anything about this, or even if you don't, just pray for these brothers, especially those right at the front line of it, which includes, some of us are implicated in it more directly than others, and these are issues that the enemy is loving. He's loving this division, loving the fact that these people who are actually getting loads of stuff done for the kingdom, who have so much agreement on the lordship of Christ, on bringing the gospel out of the kind of pietistic enclaves of the church and out into culture, who should be on the same team, can't. These divisions are real, and they're happening, and they're getting in the way of God's good work of the kingdom in our time. So yes, real stuff, real conversations have to be had. Apologies might need to be made. Restitution may need to happen, whatever that might look like in the people involved. But it's not just idealistically say, let's just forget about it and get on. We just hope and pray that this will not interrupt the work of the kingdom in this time, which we desperately need. The enemy, we do not want to get him in on the left or on the right, of course, and he will be exposing that. That's something I would totally agree with the older generation to say, if you say we're not going to critique anyone on our right, that just gives the enemy a signal that that's where to attack from, because no one's going to protect, because they're not willing to critique to their right. So absolutely, we want to critique. We want to do it as fathers and as good sons in whatever way those terms may be appropriate. So I hope you found this helpful, listener. Please do continue to support. Well, I say support the show. We don't have any way of supporting the show, but it would be quite good if we did, because we do need support to keep this going. But we don't have any way of doing that yet. So if you want to be able to support us, please get in touch. But the one thing you could do to help this podcast, because of course there's so few podcasts to listen to today, and we do actually really appreciate you giving your time to this, because there's so much you could be doing or listening to otherwise. We hope it is helpful and continues to be helpful, especially to our listeners here in the UK. But we are really grateful for our listeners in the US as well. We want to keep hearing from you. So please do get in touch, leave comments and subscribe and reviews on all those podcatchers wherever you listen to it, because that will be helpful to get this podcast out further. And by all means, come and send us critiques and questions. We want to be hearing from you and hearing whether or not you disagree on some of these things. And we might even reply to you. Who knows? Anyway, well, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Defy the devil and act like men. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Christ is Lord. God save the King. This has been That Good Fight. I've been Aaron Edwards. That's been Tom Chaldecott. And that's been...
Nathan, hello.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Farewell.